Alright guys, we'll pick things off where we left off. So we're going to go ahead and see if we can work some of these. 14 and 15, the directions say solve using any method other than the calculator. So all it means when it says calculator, it doesn't mean that you can't use your calculator at all. All that means is that you can't do one side into y1, the other side into y2, and then go to your table. That's all that's saying, is that you're not allowed to do that. So we can still use square root method, factoring, quadratic formula, any of the other methods that we've talked about so far. So with a problem like this, if you see something like this on the test, I encourage you guys to, of course you can do quadratic formula. You can, since this is already set equal to 0, you can do ABC. In this particular case, we're missing our middle term, we're missing the x, so we would say B is 0, my A is 4, and my my C is negative 64. Right, so you can solve it using the quadratic formula by doing this. But I'm going to encourage you guys to see if you guys can use the square root method to solve instead. So I'm going to show you guys how to set that up. So to set up the square root method, basically what you want at the end to set up a square root method, if you don't have a b, so this happens whenever your b is 0, you can actually set this up so that your equation has x squared on one side and then your numbers on the other side, whatever your number happens to be. And then the last step that you'll do is you'll go in, you'll take the square root of both sides. Square root gets rid of the squared, so the squared and the square root undo each other. You're left with just x equals, and then you just type this into your calculator, and you have the positive version and you have the negative version. So we'll look at what that looks like. So our goal to set up to set up the square root method is to get this by itself. Get the 4x by itself. So we draw the line down the equal sign. Usually we want to get 0 on one side. For this particular type of problem, for the square root method, we have to get the x by itself, or the x squared by itself. So I want to move this 64, so the reason I put it in a box, that way I can cover it up. Opposite of negative 64 is going to be positive 64. So we do that to both sides. Positive and negative, that goes away. 0 plus 64 gives me 64. And then on this side, this comes down, so we have 4x squared. All right, so there's my equation so far. Now, before I take the square root, I can still get the x squared completely by itself. So I can get rid of the 4. To get rid of the 4, since it's stuck together, I need to separate them. Right now, if they're stuck together like that, they're being multiplied. The opposite of multiplication is division, so we need to go in and divide this by 4. Right, so 4 over 4 is going to reduce to 1. X squared is going to be left over, so we have x squared equal to, and then you just type this into your calculator, 64 divided by 4, or if you know how to do it in your head, you should get 16. Okay, so we can set the other side equal to 16. Now I can finally go in and apply my method. My method that I'm using for this particular problem is going to be the square root method. So now I can go in and take the square root of both sides. Okay, maybe your teacher talked about this. I know that if you had me, I definitely talked about this. But the reason that we take the square root is because the square root and the square undo each other. Just like we did up here with the plus and the minus, they undid each other, so they both went away. And same thing here with the 4 divided by 4, they undid each other and they went away. Here, if we take the square root of both sides, the squared and the square root undo each other, and we're left with just the x. Okay, so our final answer here is going to be x equals, and then you just have to type this into your calculator. So square root of 16, which is a perfect square, it's 4, so our solution is 4, but that's not our only solution. Remember that the reason that we have 4 as a solution is because 4 times 4, if I multiply it by itself again, I should get right back to 16. So technically I also have a second solution, which is negative 4. So these are my two solutions. The reason that negative 4 is also a solution is because if I multiply negative 4 times negative 4, if I multiply it by itself, I also get 16. So both of these are solutions. And so that's how I would solve this. Again, it looks a lot tougher, and of course you might say, well, the quadratic formula also works, so I'm just going to do that. You're more than welcome to do that, but just understand that you can also do square root method, and you can also get the same answers. For 15, I won't solve this one, but I'll help you guys set it up. For 15, we draw the line down the equal sign. Since we have an A, B, and a C, or we will have A, B, and C, it'd be a better idea to move everything to one side and then go in and label your A, B, C, and then do quadratic formula. So for this one, if you look over here, we have 3 terms. So 1, 2, 3, right? 3 different things. On this side, we have 2 terms. You have to understand that you can move these whichever way you want. It doesn't really matter. I can move both of these to the other side, or I can move all 3 of these things to this side. It won't really make a difference. But oftentimes it's easier to move less things. So in this case, since I only have 2 things here, it's easier to move these over than it would be to move all 3 of these things over. So to get rid of, and let's go ahead and do this all in one step. To move my 4x to the other side, I'm going to do the opposite sign, so I'm going to subtract 4x. In the same move, I'm also going to move this 16 to the other side, so I'm also going to do that opposite move. So that's going to be minus 16. Okay, and then whenever I move these, I just have to make sure that they also line up in the correct spot over here. So here the x's should line up with the x's. So I'm going to say minus 4x there. And then minus 16 should line up with the other number, which in this case is minus 18. So I just line them up. I just put them where they go. So I didn't move an x squared, so there should be nothing underneath this x squared. Positive and negative go away. Positive and negative go away. Everything else should stay where it is. So we have equals 0 finally on this part, on this side. The 4x squared is going to come straight down. I didn't combine it with anything else. These two I should add together. So on your calculator, again, whenever you're adding 2 negatives, you should do minus 4 or negative 4 plus, sorry, negative 5 plus negative 4. Add those 2 things together, we get negative 9. So then my next thing would be minus 9x. And then these 2 added together, negative 18 plus negative 16, negative 34. Alright, so those are my 3 terms. So then off to the side I can go in and say A equals, B equals, C equals. Alright, my A is going to be 4. My B is going to be negative 9. And my C is negative 34. Alright, so there's A, B, C. Then I would go in and plug this into the quadratic formula. We're going to skip 15 through 18. Basically, you just have to understand, you type this into your calculator, you get 6. So your answer isn't just 6. You would say it is plus or minus 6. Right, so whatever your calculator says, you got to put plus minus, because technically 6 times 6 is 36, and negative 6 times negative 6 is 36. Right, so both of these are solutions. So with all of these, it's just plus minus, and then your solution. All right, really quickly, we'll work, I think 19, 20, I'll work 22 for you, 23, and then we'll work one of these, and then I think that's all the time we'll have today. So 19 says x squared equals 196. To solve something like this, all I would have to do is just apply the square root method, which it even says my directions are solve the following quadratic equations using the square root method. So I have to use the square root. I can't do quadratic formula. I have to do square root method. Square root method just means that I go in and I take the square root of both sides. So I take the square root of both sides. Remember that this side squared and square root cancel each other out, so both of those go away. I'm left with just the x, so I have x equals. And then on my calculator, just like we did up here, we're going to take the square root of a number, so we're going to take the square root of 196, which is going to give me 14. So that means that just like up here, the plus minus, my answer here is positive 14 and negative 14, so I can write that as plus minus 14. Number 20 is set up very, very similar to the one that we just worked up here. basically what you want to do is you want to set this equation up so that it looks like this, so that we have x squared on one side, the number on the other side, so we can just go in and take the square root of both sides. All right, so to solve with not quadratic formula, square root method, I have to draw my line down my equal sign. I have to get the x squared by itself, so I'm going to box that in, cover that up. I need to move minus 72, so we do plus 72. This goes away. 0 plus 72 is 72. 2x comes down. Sorry, 2x squared comes down. Then I don't need the 2 in front of it, so I still need to go in and divide by 2. Now I have x squared equals 72 divided by 2, which is 36. Which, if you didn't know, is another perfect square. In fact, we've already done it up here. Square root of 36 is positive and negative 6. So whenever I apply the square root method, I get that x is equal to positive and negative 6 is my solution. Of course, if you want to write it out as x equals 6 and x equals negative 6, you can also do that. Or you can just kind of put these two together and do plus minus 6. Again, the square root undoes that, and that goes away. Both of those cancel each other out. I guess I can work 21, 22, and 23. 21 is set up very, very similar. It's almost like the second to last step where we were at 2x squared equals 72. When you're at something like this, you just want to make sure that the x squared is completely by itself. So my first step here would be to divide both sides by 3. This side, the 3 and the 3 go away. I'm left with x squared. 81 divided by 3 is 27. And I think this is going to be, this is going to be a decimal. So now whenever I take the square root, again, the squared and the square root cancel each other out. We have x equal to, and now I type in square root of 27. Which is 5.19615, this whole big decimal here. Oftentimes I think your algebra teacher will ask you to go to only 2 decimal places. So if we go to the second place, that 9, you always look one more ahead. That 6 is going to round this 9 up to a 10. So that's going to be 0, and then the 1 is going to carry over, so we can round this up to 5.20. So x equals positive, negative 5.20. That's my decimal for that one. This one is actually set up almost like 19, so where I can just go in and take the square root of both sides. Again, the squared and the square root cancel. I have x equals, and then I have the square root of negative 100. Alright, now here is where a lot of us have trouble. So I just typed this in and I got an error message. And a lot of the times when we get error messages, we start to freak out. I always tell my students, don't freak out. Read your error message. Read what this thing here says. So that says no real answers. So our solution here is no real solution. So we have no real solution when it comes to equations like this. Sometimes your error here will say syntax. If it says syntax, then that means that you typed something in wrong, so go back. So instead of going to quit, which is what we usually do, go down to go to, and that's going to take you to where your problem is. Now here I don't have an error, so it tells me that my error is this, the square root, which I guess if I cleared that, my problem would go away, but that's just how your calculator works. Alright, so I guess we'll solve 23, and then I'll look at one of these, either 24 or 26. Alright, so 23, set up very, very similar. With 23, again, my end goal is to get the x squared by itself. So I'm going to box this in, cover this up. We need to get rid of plus 5, so we do minus 5. That goes away. This comes down. and then 8 minus 5 is going to be 3. And now I can take the square root of both sides. So my solution is the square root of 3. Whoops. Which is 1 point, sorry, you can't see this, 1.73. So x equals plus minus 1.73. That's my solution. All right, and then we'll do one of these. We'll do 24, and then I think we're going to have to call it a day. So if we're applying the square root method to something like this, x plus 2 equals 16. Sorry, x plus 2 squared equals 16. We can still apply the square root method. In fact, the very first step we want to do here is apply the square root method. So we go in, take the square root of both sides. What that does is it gets this squared out of here. So this squared and this cancel each other out. We're left with just x plus 2. And then this side here, the positive 16. So whenever I type this into my calculator, square root of 16, I get 4. Now, just like every other one of these where I have positive, negative, positive, negative, positive, negative, positive, negative, whenever I take the square root of a number, I should get the plus and the minus of that number. So it's not just 4, it's also negative 4. So the way I always think about this is this thing breaks and it splits into two different things. We have a 4 and then we have a negative 4. Right? So once it splits into both of these, we have to set this equation equal to both. So the first time I go, I'm going to go up and I'm going to set it equal to 4. The second time I do this, I have x plus 2, and this time I set it equal to negative 4. Then we go in and we solve. Again, solving for x, just like we did earlier, we're going to box this in. Opposite sign, so instead of plus 2, we're going to do minus 2. I have x equals 4 minus 2, which is 2. That's my first solution. Then we have x plus 2 equals negative 4. We box in the x. Subtract 2 again. That goes away. Again, be very, very careful with combining terms like this. This should be negative 4 plus negative 2. I cannot stress this enough. Make sure that you do plus, which gives me negative 6. So we have x is equal to negative 6. So this time my solution isn't plus minus. This time my solution is 2 and negative 6. The plus minus came in here with the 4 and the negative 4. I challenge you guys to do the rest of these. You guys should hopefully now be okay to finish the rest of these on your own. And just make sure that you study the rest and any other note cards or anything else that your teacher may have given you. Make sure you guys are studying. And good luck on your test tomorrow.